Hello, and welcome back to yet another episode of the podcast. My name is Jenny, aka Phantasma Witch, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about discernment. Discernment is a word that we hear a lot in the witchcraft and the psychic community. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about this because just the other day, I saw a video of someone sharing a story of theirs, and it got me thinking about our use of discernment and fear, whether that fear is internal or external. So, in this video, this person had shared their story about how they had been, quote, playing with a Ouija board, or Ouija, as I believe it's supposed to be pronounced, according to the really old game boards, and that they had been playing with this item for a while, and that there was a spirit coming through giving a very scary prediction about end times. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit for a couple of different reasons. But first, let's start with the idea of discernment. What is discernment? Discernment is to perceive or recognize the difference of things. And according to Webster's dictionary, discernment means the quality of being able to understand clearly. We use discernment every day, and it is something that should be applied to everything, internal and external. So, for example, when it comes to my podcast, I may share some information that I understand these things to be, that I understand from my personal experience or a quick Google search or whatever. However, it is up to you to discern that information, do your own research, check in with yourself, ask yourself if that feels right to you, not just on factual things, but also on opinions. I may say stuff that you don't agree with, and that's okay, but it's up to you to discern, does this clearly, do I understand this as being fact? Do I understand this as being true? Do I agree with it? And when we talk about discerning from within, we're talking about discerning our anxiety from our intuition. That's a really big one. And that's one that I could do a whole episode about. We probably won't get too into that topic, but these are the ideas of what it means to be discerning. And when you are in a community such as paganism, witchcraft, paranormal, parapsychology, psychic, I could go on and on. The list goes on forever. Cryptids. The thing that's really important to any of this is discernment. Ask questions and discernment with spirits. Because I feel like this gets forgotten quite a bit in the community and with people who are starting out. Because spirits, if we're talking about spirits in regard to a person who has passed and a fragment of them is left behind, or if we're talking about a spirit in regards to like an entity. So, like when I use the word entity, this can be uh egregore, shadow people, my goodness, like parasitic entities. There's quite an extensive list, essentially non-human uh spirits. But discernment with them, just like you would have with yourself, with everyday interactions with people, like this podcast, like when you're out and about, you apply the same discernment to spirits as well. One of my favorite examples to give is sometimes around the time of year of November, the beginning of November, end of October, I will do a workshop on ancestors. And one of the things I always have to remind anyone is to use discernment even with our ancestors. And what I mean by that is our ancestors were once living people with opinions, emotions, goals, desires, feelings, fears. They have their own thoughts and ideas that you may not agree with. You know, as a medium, this happens a lot where sometimes someone's past loved one will come through a session and perhaps their grandmother is coming through and they're questioning, why haven't you gotten married yet? And maybe you don't want to get married. Or maybe they're saying, where are the grandbabies? And maybe you don't want children, and that's okay. People, living and past, entities, spirits, have their own idea, goal, thought, feeling, opinions. They are opinions. We don't have to agree with them. And that's part of discernment with spirits. And that's very important to this conversation and to this topic that we're going to be talking about in regard to this story that this person was sharing. And we'll get back to that. We'll come back around to it. But when it comes to discernment, it's all about, as I mentioned, it's all about asking questions. It's all about asking yourself, do I agree with this? But also asking yourself the who, what, where, when, how, and why. And this is also applied to our intuition as well. Because, as I mentioned, sometimes we have to discern whether it's fear or intuition. And the only way we can do that is to ask questions, to be curious, to investigate. I like to tell people that when we are diving into our intuition, we are becoming our own detectives. We put on a detective hat, we investigate, we ask the questions, we get curious. The last thing you want to do is get fearful, is to get anxious. And yeah, we've got anxiety. Well, when I say we, I mean me. We can have anxiety. And sometimes, even with my anxiety, that's something that I have to do is I have to discern whether it's something to actually be worried about or if it's just my anxiety getting pent up, coming to the surface. Because sometimes my anxiety tries to trick me. Sometimes my anxiety likes to tell me that something's horribly wrong and nothing's wrong. And that's where discernment comes in with self, is saying, okay, but is something really wrong, or do I know this feeling to just be anxiety? And that takes a lot of effort. That takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of practice. So it's okay if it takes time. It's okay if you don't know, because it's a lived thing. When I say a lived thing, I mean it's a live-long thing. It's something that you will be working at throughout your life. Because even when you get a hold of it and you're like, oh, okay, I can discern between my anxiety and fact, it's still gonna pop up. That's natural. Nothing is just a perfect progression upwards, right? There's always ups and downs because that's life. Life isn't just a perfect progression upwards. We have ups, we have downs, we have yeses, we have nos. So, going back to discernment, when you're asking these questions, yes, you ask them of yourself, but you also ask them from the person that you're receiving this from. So, whether that's me on my podcast or a story that you're watching on TikTok or a spirit that you're communicating with, asking, why am I receiving this information from this person? Like, what is their intent? Questioning the intent, right? If someone's adamant that you believe them, being like, okay, why would this person want me to believe this? Where is this coming from? That's not to say that the answer is always going to be bad and that somebody's always going to be trying to take advantage of you. No, 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 no. But it's good to ask these questions to critically think about these things. This is how you avoid, you know, uh, being taken advantage of. This is how you avoid psychic scammers, snake oil salespeople, right? People who want to sell you something. That is when you have to be cautious. And when I say people who want to sell you something, I'm not talking about like a physical object and payment. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. With the unfortunate psychic scammers out there, that can be a thing. But this can be trying to sell you an idea. This can be trying to sell you fear. You have to ask, why? Why is that? What do they get out of this? That's the big question. What does this other person get from my reaction? What does this person get from me? What does this person get in general? So, when it comes to spirits, it's a great question to ask. Anytime you work with spirits, play it safe. Play it safe. Ask, what's the exchange? What do they get? Why? This is something that a lot of people will teach you when you start working with any kind of spirits, like whether it's guides or a team, a spirit team of some kind, whatever you want to call them, whatever works for you, your culture, your verbiage. But asking, what do they receive out of this? And does that align with you? Because sometimes you'll get a spirit or even a living person who will ask something from you that you're not comfortable with. And guess what? You can have boundaries. You can say no because you have free will. If you choose to, you can say no. I'm going to have a whole nother episode on boundaries because oh, that's another one I could talk for quite some time on. And I have a lot to say on it. But we'll get back to that. So, what does the other person get from you? Getting back to this story about the Ouija board. Let's talk about the Ouija board or Ouija. I'm going to keep saying Ouija because that's how I grew up saying it. I know, I'm sorry. It's supposed to be Ouija. I know. I'm going to keep saying Ouija and I just can't help it. I'm sorry. So let's talk a little bit about it. What what is a Ouija board? So many of us, I feel like, know what a Ouija board is, but if you don't, it's a board that has in one corner it says, I believe, hello. In another corner it says goodbye. In one corner it says yes. In another corner it says no. And then it has the alphabet as well as numbers. And this board comes with what is known as a planchette. And the planchette has either like a little window or a little pencil. It depends on the board. They're all slightly different depending on when it was made, the time period, and the people who made it. And this little planchette will highlight a certain letter or number or word or whatever. It will spell out different things. And the idea behind the board is that it is a tool to connect in with spirits from the other side. Now, modern day, I'll get into the past in a little bit here, but I just want to quickly say that modern day, Ouija is very much feared. And if you have fear around a Ouija board, I just want to clarify that's okay. You don't have to use anything that you're uncomfortable with. If something scares you, if something makes you uncomfortable, if something does not resonate with you, you don't have to use it. But you also don't want to demonize and villainize something because you don't use it or don't agree with it. You know? So, with that being said, a lot of modern day depictions of the Ouija board are very negative. very scary. And a lot of that does stem from belief systems that see ghosts, spirits, and entities as evil, as demonic, as negative or bad, and has been sensationalized through entertainment and media to be those things, because that's where our fear is. And look, I'm someone who used to work in the entertainment industry, and I get it. Using different items, different cultural ideas, Western cultural ideas around something that seems mysterious and scary, and like, hey, let's play that up and put it in a horror movie. Okay, but it's entertainment. It's scary to watch, but it's entertainment. It's similar to the scary ghost. We have a lot of media that depicts ghosts as being very, very, very scary. That doesn't mean every ghost is going to be scary. We have a lot of media that depicts hauntings as always being demonic. Doesn't mean it's actually going to be demonic in real life, right? Again, we can talk about that much more in another episode. So, the current day depiction of the Ouija board, oh my gosh, can't help it. The current day depiction is based on a lot of these fears. And to be completely honest, I was terrified of Ouija boards when I was a kid. Absolutely terrified of them. But I was also somebody who had a lot of spirit experiences, sightings in my own home. So it made sense. I didn't want to invite any more of that into my life. I already had it. I was already seeing mists and hearing footsteps and seeing shadow people. I did not want more spirits hanging around. And so that plus how the Ouija board was often depicted made me very scared of it. And I didn't want anything to do with it. And the first experience I ever had with a Ouija board was a scary one. And I'm sharing this because I want to share with you my progression to where I am now. So when we get to the end of the episode, you can be like, oh, okay. When I was, I would say probably around 12 years old, maybe 11, I went to a sleepover. Of course. Don't all Ouija board stories start with a sleepover? I went to a sleepover, and of course, at the sleepover, they had a Ouija board. And we decided we were going to play it. They pull out the board, and we go into the garage where we were all hanging out because it had been like turned into a den. We go in and we start playing with the Ouija board. And what do you think a bunch of preteen kids are going to ask the Ouija board about? Our crushes, silly, stupid things like who farted. Yeah, kid things, silly, dumb things, not serious at all. And at first, the spirit was very lighthearted because we approached it very lighthearted. We all came to the Ouija board not taking it seriously, blaming each other for moving it. We were all having a good laugh because it was silly. And the spirit that came through was being silly too. Named itself Bob, started telling jokes and stuff. It was very fun at the beginning, but one of the kids decided to make it scary. One of the kids started asking scary questions. Ask scary questions, get scary answers. And the energy changed. And suddenly it wasn't fun anymore. And suddenly Bob was a serial killer. And suddenly Bob was a demon. And suddenly, based on the questions we asked. And I didn't want to touch it anymore. And I didn't want to play with it anymore. It was no longer fun. So we'll come back to the story. Let's talk about the original use. The original use was as far as I can tell, again, do your own research. Maybe I'll do a full research episode, but the spiritualist movement, if you know what that is, the spiritualist movement was really at its height around the 1820s, 1920s. It was mostly during the 19th century, a little bit into 20th. But this was a time, specifically the Victorians, were very, very much invested in communicating with the dead. And there's a lot of historical reasons for this. There's a lot of historical reasons. People wanted to connect with their loved ones who had passed away. People wanted to feel validated that there is life after death. And this was their way of doing that, was through the spiritualist movement. The spiritualist movement was full of mediums who could communicate with past loved ones. It was full of different techniques and tools that were used to communicate with people who had passed. These ranged from what is known as table tipping or table knocking. So this would be where you would ask a question and the table that you're all putting your hands on would tip in certain directions and sometimes even float. Or table knocking, in which the table would feel and sound as if someone was knocking on it, even though everybody's hands were flat on the table. There was also different ideas and techniques of using chalkboards and using instruments and using, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people who would do sleight of hand as well during this time period. And you would get people like Houdini who would try to prove these people wrong because there were, unfortunately, a lot of people who were taking advantage of people's grief and who were not actually mediums. And the spiritualist community was actually filled with a lot of femfolk because at the time, women couldn't get jobs. They couldn't do certain things. They couldn't, there was a lot of restrictions. We know this. And so this movement, if you look, a lot of mediums, a lot of spiritualist leaders, a lot of people who could communicate with spirits and claimed to be able to do so were people who were identified as women because it gave them that freedom to work and to do this. Anyways, it's pretty amazing when you look up the social and the cultural ways of how it allowed women to kind of break out of their mold and the box there. So if that's something that interests you, definitely look it up. But let's get back to the topic at hand here, which is that the spiritualists and the mediums during the spiritualist movement used different tools. And the Ouija board was one of them. Now, the Ouija board was trademarked eventually later and was made into a consumer product. So anybody, not even, you didn't have to be a medium, you didn't have to be a part of the spiritualist movement. Anybody could now communicate with spirits using a Ouija board. So it opened the door to a lot of people. However, when I believe it's, of course, got America got its hands on this product, the consumerism of it was how do we sell it? The capitalist idea, how do we sell it? And what's pretty amazing is that we go from seeing the Ouija board as a tool for mediumship to communicate with spirits. No fear around this. This was all connecting with loved ones, connecting with people you cared about to get that final goodbye. It all stemmed from love. So what did capitalist movement do? Oh, well, when you're using a Ouija board, you're sitting very close to one another. Your knees are very close to each other on the under the table. You may even touch hands. Ooh, so scandalous. And so the Ouija board was marketed as a tool of a fun board game for date night. And one of the best examples, being an artist, I have to mention it, is Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell was a illustrator for the Saturday Evening Post. If you don't know who Norman Rockwell is, definitely search Norman Rockwell. Beautiful, beautiful artwork. Unfortunately, a lot of Norman Rockwell's work is used as the, oh, look at this perfect white family. But Norman Rockwell, do your research on Norman Rockwell. You'll find out that how Norman Rockwell is used today is not just, that's just a surface layer. Again, we can get into this another time. It's not really relevant to this conversation, but Norman Rockwell was an illustrator for the Saturday Evening Post, and Norman Rockwell did a illustration for one of these covers where it is a couple using the Ouija board, and the femme person on the cover has their hands on the planchette and they look like they're possibly channeling and they're in the zone. And the masculine looking character is very much leaning in, very much in tune with the other person. And so it was used as a dating game, not to date ghosts, but to get closer with the person that you're doing this activity with. All of this to say that it was never, ever, for the longest time, talked about being a portal to hell, talked about being a portal for demons. None of the original historical uses, none of the original advertising, none of it was fear-based. None. Until modern times. I wouldn't be surprised. I would have to look if this is also connected to satanic panic. If you don't know about satanic panic, there's another fun activity you can look up. But the point is, it was never intended to be something scary. It was always meant to be something around love, a past loved one, getting closer to the person you love, that you want to be in a relationship with. So, going back a little bit now that we kind of have the understanding of what the Ouija board used to be. And if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the first depictions of the Ouija board in a really negative light is with The Exorcist. But again, I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. And it's just kind of spiraled into much more negative things from there. And unfortunately, a lot of divination tools, a lot of tools connected with communicating with spirits has become seen as a negative thing. But overall, one of my favorite quotes from Greg and Dana Newkirk, amazing paranormal investigators, is curiosity over fear. I've considered getting this tattooed on me because I love it so much. Curiosity over fear. This kind of goes back to the beginning when I was talking about asking the questions. Ask yourself questions, not out of fear, out of curiosity, with childlike wonder, and be like, oh, I wonder. I wonder what that could mean. I wonder why I got that intuitive feeling. I wonder where that's coming from. How exciting. And as hard as it is, applying that to spirits as well. When you have an experience and it seems really scary, do your best to first laugh it off. Laughter is the best medicine. Laugh it off and then be like, I wonder what that was. I wonder if that'll happen again. So approach any tools and any activities within this realm with curiosity. Because the energy that you put into it, it's the energy you're going to get back. And this goes back to my story about my personal experience with a Ouija board, where it started off really fun because we were in a fun, childlike wonderment of let's just play around with this thing. It's silly. We're not taking it seriously. We're having fun. And then when one of the kids started pouring their fear into it, started asking horrific questions, terrifying, scary questions, that's what we got back. So, going back to discernment with this specific story of this person who's claiming to have this experience with a Ouija board and that they're communicating with a spirit that's telling them the date of the end days. First thing I want to say is, uh, do I honestly believe that they were using a Ouija board and that they contacted something that told them this? It's very possible. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Could they be making it up for more views, for more likes, drumming up fear because of the topic? Because it's a bunch of scary topics. A Ouija board is considered very scary to a lot of people out here in Western society out here. Uh, the end times and the details of that and the date of that, is that fear mongering? Is that drumming up fear and getting more views because people are fear watching, doom scrolling? That's very likely too. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they actually are speaking with a spirit that's telling them these things. My first question would be, did you approach the board with fear? My next question is, are you asking the board those questions? Because again, the energy that you put into these tools is the energy you're going to get back. If you approach it with fear, you're going to get fear. If you approach it with curiosity, it's a lot easier to explore with wonderment. And if something scary does come up, you, like I said at the beginning, you can put up a boundary. You can say no and say, you know what, I don't like that this is starting to talk about some stuff that really freaks me out. So I'm done. I don't want to talk anymore. You can uphold a boundary with spirits. You can uphold a boundary with spirits just like you do people. We'll do a whole nother episode on that one. But let's say they are talking to a spirit that's actually talking about these things. Let's say that they weren't intentionally asking these kind of questions. This is when we get to the discernment of, okay, why would the spirit be saying these things? What do they get out of it? Do they get your fear? Do they get your excitement? And more specifically, my question would be, if a random person came up to you on the street and told you that you had 3 days to live, why would you believe them? You don't know them. They don't know you. You don't know if they're a psychic, a credible one. Why would you believe something that is being told to you by someone else? Because this is like what a Ouija board is. When you approach it with curiosity, when you approach it safely with protection, and you go and you're just like, let's see, let's just have fun with it. You don't have to believe every single thing that it tells you. You can choose, you can discern for yourself. And it's just like if you had your window open and if somebody walking by your window shouted something at you, that you're just like, I'm shrugging. You're shrugging and going, what the heck is that all about? Like, this person's telling me that it's raining apples and oranges outside, but I don't even see rain. I'm not going to believe this person. Obviously, I can choose to say, no, thanks, and close my window. I can close my window. So, when it comes to the paranormal, metaphysical, witchcraft, spell work, all these things, Be curious. Ask questions. Be discerning. Be discerning of your feelings and your thoughts from within. Be discerning of other people, spirits and entities, and ask the questions. And ask them from curiosity without fear. Like I said, it's hard to approach these things completely without fear, especially if you're coming from a background of religious trauma. Of course, it can be difficult to approach them without fear at all, but it's baby steps. The minute you start to approach an area where you feel uncomfortable, that's when you go, oh, pump the brakes, I'm done. No, okay, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna stop. So that's today's episode. Thank you again for joining me. Don't forget to check out my Patreon if you want to learn more from me. There is free stuff over on my Patreon as well as membership where you can get access to monthly magical workshops, Q&As, and then outside of Patreon, I also have a Tarot Scope Live I do at the end of every month. And that is on YouTube as well as my Patreon. They're streamed simultaneously. And I'm over on Blue Sky for random funny thoughts, feelings, whatever comes my way that I want to share. You can also find me currently, as of right now, when I'm recording this, on Instagram. And I'm trying to think. Oh, yeah, of course. If you would like to book a session with me, book a reading with me, um, intuitive consultation, pet communication, palm reading, tarot reading, you can absolutely do so through my website, phantasmawitch.com. Everything will be linked in the description below. If you have any questions for the podcast, head over to my Patreon. Feel free to drop your questions there, and hopefully, I will talk to you in the next episode. And thanks for listening.